The courtroom air was stale, thick with fluorescent silence. Paper rustled behind the clerk's desk, but her voice was barely more than a mutter. "Gerald Monroe? No legal rep? Just sit there, sir." Gerald shuffled forward slowly, as if gravity itself protested his movement. His shirt hung loose, stained with old coffee and something darker. One sleeve was torn at the cuff, and the pants he wore had seen too many winters and too few washings. Blood crusted near his right eyebrow, dry and flaking, the souvenir of a fall he hadn't meant to take. Sidewalks in winter are unforgiving, especially when you're shoved. Two bailiffs barely looked up as they guided him to the defense table. Cuffs bit into his thin wrists, purple around the edges. One of them whispered something under his breath. The other smirked. Gerald said nothing. He hadn't said much since the night it happened, or since the morning after, when the cold cell door creaked and the public defender never arrived. The prosecutor, a young man with more confidence than experience, didn't even rise from his chair. He glanced at a file and muttered into the mic. Standard vagrancy case. Resisting arrest. Minor altercation. Shelter incident. Nothing violent. Recommend fines and 6-month hold. Is the defendant mute? The judge asked. No, Your Honor. Just unresponsive. Unresponsive. Gerald almost chuckled. He wasn't unresponsive. He just knew no one was asking him anything worth answering. They didn't want his story. They wanted closure. He kept his eyes locked on the flag behind the bench. Dusty. Faded, but still upright. It was the only thing in the room that hadn't forgotten what it was supposed to stand for. No one noticed the veteran's shoes, military issue, soles nearly peeled off, still laced with habit. No one noticed his knuckles, scarred and calloused from years gripping the handles of stretchers, rifles, and shovels in every terrain known to man. No one saw the man, just the record. Once, Gerald had commanded men in places the world forgot. He had crawled through jungles where the sun never reached the forest floor, spoken code under fire, pulled bodies from wreckage, carried children through burned villages. He had trained young soldiers who now had stars on their collars. Some of those boys still called him sir, or would if they saw him. But no one looked at him now. The judge drummed her fingers on the bench. No representation. No motion to dismiss? The clerk cleared her throat. Court-appointed counsel sent a message. He's overloaded. Couldn't attend today. There was an awkward pause. So, Mr. Monroe, the judge began, do you have anything to say in your defense? Gerald blinked once. He turned his head slightly, jaw set, lips dry. The words were there, buried under years of dust. But still, he said nothing. He didn't plead. He didn't deny. He didn't whimper or ask for mercy. He simply stared at the flag again. Then the creak. The heavy courtroom doors at the back swung open. Not rushed, not slammed, just opened with a kind of gravity that turned heads. A hush followed. Not demanded. Not forced. Natural. Boots tapped on the polished floor, purposeful and steady. A single man stepped through, dressed in dark blue. His chest bore rows of ribbons. His eyes were locked on the man in cuffs. He walked down the center aisle, not hurried, not hesitant. Somewhere, in the silence, an old bailiff whispered, "Is that?" The man in blue walked straight to Gerald's table, stood beside him, and without asking, he sat, not next to a defendant, but beside a brother-in-arms. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Identify yourself, sir." He nodded once. "Major Elijah Grant, United States Army, retired." The judge narrowed her eyes. "Major, you're not listed as counsel." "I'm not," Elijah said, voice low, resonant. "But I won't sit back and watch this." And just like that, every eye in the courtroom, even those that had never looked at Gerald Monroe before, finally turned toward him, for the first time, and something shifted in the room, like maybe justice had just been given its first breath of air. Elijah Grant didn't flinch when the judge's gavel struck once in warning. "Major Grant," she said sternly, "this is not a military tribunal. You are not counsel. You're not authorized to speak." "I understand," he said calmly. never raising his voice. But I'm not here to speak as his attorney. I'm here as someone who owes his life to the man in those cuffs. The courtroom rustled. A woman near the back leaned forward in her seat. The prosecutor rolled his eyes and made a note on his legal pad. Probably something dismissive. But Elijah didn't care. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a faded green folder, the edges worn and taped. With a reverent hand, he laid it flat on the table next to Gerald. Gerald, still silent, didn't look at it. His hands, trembling faintly from age or fatigue, stayed folded. Elijah placed a hand on the folder, firm but gentle, a gesture of protection. And then he looked the judge square in the eye. "This man," he began, "once carried me through enemy territory. My lungs were half full of blood, and my arm was shredded. He was already retired, had no reason to be out there. But when our unit's convoy was ambushed in the Wazir Valley, he didn't hesitate." There was a pause, a heavy one. The prosecutor sighed theatrically. "Your Honor, I respect the uniform. But what does this have to do with the incident at the shelter? This is a courtroom, not a reunion." But the judge didn't interrupt Elijah. She was listening now. So was everyone else. "I know what this looks like to you," Elijah said. "An old man in cuffs. No lawyer. No home. You think he snapped at a shelter and caused a scene. But that's not what happened. And the only reason I know that is because I know Gerald Monroe. I know what he stands for." He slid the folder toward the clerk's bench. Inside are commendations from 3 decades of service. Testimonials from men he trained. He never asked for promotion. Never asked for attention. He just served. Quietly. The clerk took the folder hesitantly. The judge nodded toward her. "Mark it as an exhibit. Continue, Major." Elijah turned to Gerald, who finally looked at him. His eyes were tired, but something flickered there. Recognition, maybe even shame. "You dragged me through gunfire, Gerald," Elijah said, lowering his voice. "Now let me stand for you." Gerald looked back down, but this time, there was a breath in his chest that hadn't been there before. Across the aisle, the prosecutor stood. "All respect to the Major, but none of this changes the fact that Mr. Monroe resisted arrest and shoved a security guard at a public shelter. That is what we are here for, not his military record." "And you're wrong," Elijah replied without looking at him. "You don't have the facts. You have assumptions." He stood slowly, one hand on the desk, the other still relaxed at his side. "You saw an incident on paper, but I saw the man behind it. And I'm telling you, that man didn't shove anyone. He stepped between a traumatized woman and an overzealous guard. That's what really happened. And I can prove it." The judge's tone softened. "You have evidence?" "I have a starting point," Elijah said. "Give me 72 hours. Let me show you what really happened." The room held its breath. The judge leaned back in her chair. She studied Gerald again, this time not with indifference, but with curiosity. Then she looked to Elijah. "You're not an attorney, Major. You understand that you're treading on procedural violations." "I do," he answered. "But if I don't speak up, who will?" She nodded slowly, then turned to the court recorder. "This hearing is continued. 72 hours. Major Grant, if you intend to present evidence, do so formally. I want facts, not sentiment." Her gavel came down once, but she didn't leave the bench. Instead, she stared for a moment longer at the man who hadn't said a word in his own defense, and the one who just risked his reputation to speak for him. Then, as court adjourned, something remarkable happened. People didn't shuffle out. They stood up, slowly, respectfully. Some had tears in their eyes. Others just watched as Elijah helped Gerald to his feet and guided him gently past the benches, like a soldier escorting a general, not a criminal. At the back, near the exit, an older man in a tan coat and a faded army pin touched his chest and whispered to no one in particular. "About damn time someone remembered who that man is." 3 days later, the courtroom was not the same. Rows once half empty were now filled with unfamiliar faces. Men with sun-worn hands, women with service pins on faded jackets, A few in wheelchairs, others walking with quiet dignity. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said everything. Elijah Grant stood beside Gerald Monroe once more. But this time, something in the air had shifted. The judge noticed it too. A stillness laced with something heavier than curiosity. Respect. "Major Grant," she said. "You may proceed." Elijah's voice, low and deliberate, filled the space. Wazir Valley, 1991. Operation Riptide. I was 21. First combat deployment. Our convoy took fire. I was hit. Shrapnel in my ribs, bleeding into my vest. Couldn't move. I thought I was done. He looked at Gerald. But Gerald Monroe, already retired, already past his service years, picked me up and carried me 6 miles through hostile terrain. His shoulder was dislocated. His uniform soaked in blood. And he didn't stop. He raised a photo, aged and folded at the corners. That's me in a field tent. That's him beside me, smiling somehow, like saving lives was just another Tuesday. The judge examined it in silence. He stayed after that, Elijah continued. Didn't go home. Taught combat medics how to improvise in chaos. Never asked for a medal. Never wanted his name on a plaque. He laid more documents on the table, a dozen letters, some handwritten. One read, "He taught me how to stop the bleeding. My buddy survived because of him." The clerk handed copies to the bench. The judge turned to Gerald. "Mr. Monroe, why wasn't any of this brought up before?" Gerald's mouth twitched. His voice was rough and distant. "Didn't think people listened to ghosts." A pause. "You think I'm a ghost," he added, "because you stopped seeing me." The room was still. Elijah stepped forward again. And yet here he is, arrested for something he didn't do. For stepping between a woman in crisis and a guard too impatient to notice. He held up a USB stick. "This is the footage. It speaks louder than I can." The screen flickered. Shelter surveillance played silently. A woman in the corner. Tense, rocking, her eyes unfocused. A guard towered over her, yelling. Gerald stepped in, slow and calm. Hands out. Mouth moving. "She's in a flashback. Let her breathe." Then the guard shoved him. Gerald fell hard. No punches. No raised voice. No aggression. The judge didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the frozen final frame. "He wasn't resisting," Elijah said. "He was protecting someone weaker, like he always has." The prosecutor shifted awkwardly. I'd like to question the guard tomorrow." The judge nodded. "So ordered. We reconvene at 10. Elijah helped Gerald stand. As they turned to leave, someone in the gallery, a woman in civilian clothes with medals sewn to her bag, whispered, "He saved my brother's life." Outside the courtroom, word spread not through headlines, but through reverence. And Gerald, once unseen, now walked like a man beginning to re-enter the world. The next morning, the courtroom filled before the doors officially opened. There were no news crews, no media circus, but veterans whispered to each other outside, and a few shelter volunteers came in pairs, uncertain if they'd be let inside. They were. The judge had ordered the gallery open. Gerald entered with Elijah at his side, not in cuffs this time. Just slow steps, a cane someone had quietly handed him the night before. His jacket, though frayed, was pressed. His boots were polished, not out of vanity, but out of habit. The judge took her seat. "We'll resume with testimony from Officer Givens." The shelter guard stepped forward, stiff in his uniform. His badge caught the overhead lights. He looked like he'd aged in the past 24 hours. "I was on duty that night," he began. "There was yelling from the east wing. I saw a woman, Miss Clay, shaking, crouched. I approached. Thought maybe she was on something. I raised my voice." He paused. "And the defendant?" the judge asked. "He came between us. Didn't touch me. Didn't raise his hands." He said, "She's reliving something. Step back." I thought he was interfering, so I pushed past him. He went down. "Did he hit you?" "No, ma'am. I overreacted. I didn't see it clearly. I thought he was a problem. But he wasn't. The judge took a breath, then looked down. "You may step down." The courtroom remained quiet as Marlene Clay was called next. She walked slowly, eyes scanning the faces in the gallery. Her hands trembled as she took her seat. "I was at the shelter that night," she said, voice shaky. "The noise, the overhead lights. I lost where I was. I thought I was back in Kandahar. I'd been deployed twice. Got ambushed my last tour. It all just came back." She wiped her eyes. "Gerald saw it before I even realized it was happening. He said something soft. Told the others not to touch me. When the guard got close, Gerald stood in front of me." Her voice cracked. "I didn't say thank you. I didn't even see him again. I just saw cuffs. I thought they were taking him away because of me." She looked directly at Gerald. "You didn't just protect me. You recognized what was happening. No one else did." Elijah handed over another folder, this one containing statements from other shelter residents and workers, confirming Gerald's pattern of calm, protective behavior. One described him pulling a young man away from a panic attack by speaking softly. Another showed him gently guiding a woman to a quiet corner when loud voices erupted. The judge opened the file and read in silence for several moments. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quieter now. "This court owes an apology," she said. "Not just for the arrest, but for the failure to ask the right questions." She turned to Gerald. "We failed to see you, Mr. Monroe. We judged a moment without understanding its weight." Gerald nodded but didn't smile. His hands folded neatly in his lap. "It's enough that someone finally did," he said softly. The courtroom was still, but the air was no longer heavy. It was reverent. The prosecutor stood, glanced around, then said what no one expected. "We move to dismiss all charges." The gavel didn't strike with force this time. It tapped once, like punctuation to a truth long buried. As Gerald stood to leave, veterans in the gallery rose with him. Not in celebration, in recognition. He didn't bow, didn't wave, just touched his temple, the closest thing to a salute he'd given in years. The case was dismissed. No reporters waited outside. No breaking news banners flashed across screens. But somehow, by the next morning, the story had already traveled. It passed from one veteran to another over burnt coffee in American Legion halls. It whispered across shelter staff meetings and wound its way through police inboxes. The tale wasn't told with drama. It moved like memory, and it stuck. 3 days later, River's Edge Shelter quietly announced a name change. Monroe House. No ribbon cutting. Just a new sign hung above the front door, hand-carved by a volunteer whose brother once served with Gerald in the Philippines. Every staff member was retrained. Trauma protocols were introduced. Listen before you act became a part of orientation. Gerald wasn't credited for any of it, not officially. But everyone knew. He hadn't returned to the shelter. He never asked for apologies. But quietly, his name echoed there, in the way the staff softened their tones, in how they offered space before force. Meanwhile, at the Westland Police Department, an internal memo was circulated. A new training module on PTSD and civilian crisis response. Guess who was listed as a special consultant? Gerald Monroe. They offered him a stipend. He declined. Instead, he gave 2 sessions a month, seated in the back of the training room with a cane by his chair and folders filled with handwritten notes. He never raised his voice, but when he spoke, every rookie listened. At first, Gerald didn't want to return to the Veterans Center. Not after years of being turned away or told, "We're full today." But Elijah insisted. "They'll listen now," he said, "because they've seen what happens when they don't." So Gerald went. He didn't counsel in the formal sense. No license, no office, but he was there. And for many, that was enough. He sat in the common room. He taught breathing tricks, shared field hacks for managing flashbacks. Sometimes he just listened. Once a month, Elijah returned, too. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with younger soldiers. "This is the man who taught me how to stay alive," he'd say. Not with weapons, with clarity. A boy named Mateo, just 10 years old, came with his father one day. The boy shyly handed Gerald a folded American flag, the kind sold at gas stations and kept in bedroom windows. "My dad says you're a legend." Gerald smiled faintly, took the flag with both hands, and knelt, slowly, knees crackling. "Tell him I'm just someone who remembered what we're supposed to do. Look out for each other. That doesn't expire." He didn't hang the flag. He didn't frame it. He kept it in a drawer beside his cot. Folded, clean, protected. Some things don't need to be seen to be honored. Gerald still walked slowly, still flinched at sudden sounds. He still spent most evenings alone, sipping weak tea and reading paperbacks with broken spines. But now, when he passed by the shelter or the police station or the courthouse, people didn't look through him. They nodded, and that was enough. The months passed without fanfare, but the changes stayed. Gerald never sought the spotlight, and he never got it, not the way television gives it. But something quieter and far more permanent began to take root in Westland. The Veterans Center saw a 40% increase in attendance for trauma counseling. Not because of ads, because word spread. The old guy with the cane actually listens. He's been there. The police academy added a line to their handbook. When in doubt, listen like Monroe. It wasn't a law, but every new cadet heard it during orientation. And once a year, on the anniversary of his arrest, Monroe House held a small candlelight vigil. No speeches, no press releases, just stories whispered from one survivor to another. People who had once slept on concrete now volunteered to sweep the steps and say, "He saw me when no one else did." Gerald kept to his habits. Up at dawn, tea by 7, a short walk when his knees allowed, then down to the corner bench near Liberty Square, where he read or simply watched. Sometimes, a stranger would stop and ask, "Are you the one they named the shelter after?" He'd nod once. "Wasn't just me. A lot of folks helped. I just said something at the right time." But those who really knew him, the ones who sat beside him quietly, or listened when he spoke with no microphone, they understood. Gerald wasn't just a man who'd said something. He was a man who acted when others froze. A man who saw what no one else noticed. Elijah visited often. They didn't talk about the court case anymore. They didn't need to. They talked about sunrise over Wazir Valley. About a boy named Finn who Elijah was mentoring. A kid with sharp instincts and a bad stutter. "He reminds me of you," Elijah said once. "I hope not," Gerald replied, chuckling. "He deserves better knees." And one cold morning in early spring, Gerald didn't show up on the bench. It wasn't alarming at first. But by noon, Elijah was knocking on his door. No answer. The landlord, a quiet man named Curtis, used his spare key. They found Gerald in his chair, peaceful, tea still warm beside him. His hands were folded, and on his lap, laid neatly, was that small flag, the one Mateo had given him. Crisp, clean, and perfectly folded. They held the service a week later. No grand cathedral, just the community center gym, where folding chairs lined the walls and a podium stood under a single American flag. The room was packed. Veterans, cadets, nurses, judges, clerks, shelter workers, teens in ROTC uniforms. Even Officer Givens, the man who'd shoved Gerald years before, sat in the front row, his cap in his hands, eyes lowered. Elijah spoke briefly. He never demanded to be seen, but when he finally was, he made us all better. No one clapped, no one cheered. Instead, when the moment of silence ended, the entire room rose to their feet, row by row without instruction. Because some people command standing ovations not with noise, but with integrity. Later that day, a small plaque was added beneath the new shelter sign, named for Gerald Monroe, a man who saw others when no one else did. And beneath that, in smaller letters, "Look out for each other. That doesn't expire." Gerald didn't need medals. He had meaning, and long after his footsteps faded from Westland sidewalks, the city never walked quite the same again.